Welcome back to CareCast, the podcast from Caresoft, the trusted government IT solutions provider. Subscribe to get the latest technology updates in the public sector. I'm Anthony Jimenez, your host from the Caresoft production team. On behalf of Caresoft and Fed Insider, we would like to welcome you to today's podcast, focused around improving the customer experience. Dr. Craig Knight, Solutions Engineer at Okta, and Michelle Taylor, CIO of the Leon County Government, will discuss how state agencies use technology more effectively, move towards data-driven solutions, and improve Floridians' digital interactions with government.
So what an amazing group that we have, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Michelle, let's start with you. Okay, what are some of the successes that you might have seen from the stand-up of the Florida Digital Services since 2020?
Well, most recently, last year, the Florida Digital Service was awarded a $30 million cybersecurity grant. So that by far was the biggest positive impact we had from FLDS. That's really when I got to know those folks over there. And so through that, they were able, it was specifically for cybersecurity and specifically for cities and counties across the state. They were challenged, first of all, with making that big of an award in a very short period of time, which they successfully did. I understand 193 separate agencies benefited from that in 66 out of 67 of the counties. And in Leon County, we were awarded $720,000 worth of licenses for 2 cybersecurity solutions. And one of those was for a next generation AI-based antivirus solution. And so we have that installed and we're taking advantage of that now. And that was huge for us, especially with 2024 being an election year. And I don't know if there's anybody here from the House or the Senate, but we're hoping there's $40 million for 2024 budgeted that hasn't yet been released. We've been lobbying for that to please be released, so that the cities and counties that benefited from that last year would be able to continue that this year, with especially being an election year. See that as being very important. So that's kind of where we are. And so if anybody does work for the legislature and wants to kind of put in a good word, we'd appreciate that.
Well, I can imagine, because that especially as you brought up, this is an election year coming up, and the cybersecurity within the elections are so important. Mm-hmm. It's probably really important that you do get that budget passed in time, in a timely manner, so you can get things installed, right? Or get
well, it's already installed. We just want to be able to keep it.
Keep it running.
Yeah, so.
Outstanding. Well, Craig, how do programs like the Florida Digital Services help vendors target support for the state, region, and local governments and agencies?
Well, they are actually able to do a good bit of consultation. And I imagine there are many people and many organizations represented in this room who have done consulting alongside FLDS and have actually had advice received from digital services to basically say, here's what we need to be looking at in terms of this cybersecurity issue. Here's what we need to be looking at in terms of this cyber threat. I don't want to step on the toes of your second hour's panel, Michael, because I know that we're going to be talking about cybersecurity in the second hour, but the basic idea is they're a resource that can actually talk for counties and cities and state government agencies and basically say, here are the things you need to be looking at. Here are the things you need to be doing to make sure you don't find yourself in the situation in which our neighbors to the north in Fulton County, Georgia are today. Yeah. And if you haven't been following that in the news, where Fulton County, Georgia actually got hit with a ransomware attack about a month ago, they still don't have access to all of their systems restored yet. And from the story that I read out of Atlanta this morning, the ransomware organization who has gotten control of some of their systems basically said, if you don't pay the ransom by 8:39 a.m. on Thursday morning of this week. And I thought that was really a weird time, 8:39 a.m. I don't know why they picked
very specific.
Very specific right there. But if you don't pay the ransom, then we're going to start releasing citizen data that was actually impacted. And so FLDS can be that consultation group for state agencies, for county government, for local government to say, we want to make sure that your data is secure. We want to make sure that you don't fall victim to the kinds of attacks that Fulton County, Georgia has now fallen victim to. And so I would encourage you to be reaching out and talking with the folks at FLDS. They're so busy protecting citizens of the state of Florida today, they're not even necessarily able to come here and be on the panel with us because they're that active in trying to make sure that we're protected as residents of the state of Florida.
It's really interesting, and you bring up a good point, is that Florida Digital Services is almost like an umbrella protection plan for the state that allows kind of like CISA in the federal agency that provides services and functions and capabilities that everybody can utilize. Am I right?
They are an umbrella agency in that way. And by the way, it is raining.
Yes, it is.
It is raining. Use the umbrella agency. It is raining.
Yes. So Michelle, speaking of Florida Digital Services, are there impacts that you've seen besides what you just mentioned for the local and regional level as a result of the Florida Digital Services stand-up?
Well, the impacts were, this grant, that was the big impact for our local governments to be able to take advantage of that and use that for the cybersecurity stuff.
And they were the oversight for the grants, like the federal grants that came for the entire state and for all the states. They were the oversight for those grants and provided those packages that did it, which is a major function that goes on. Are there other services like, we'll get into it later, but basically like educational services?
They do offer a lot of educational services. They have their collab set up over there. And if you've not been over there to see that, that's a nice space. They bring in different vendors for training purposes, but also for very interactive, kind of more workshop kind of models.
Right.
And that's very, very useful. And I know we're talking about collaboration a little later, but that also helps build those collaborative opportunities.
Okay. Outstanding. But Craig, have we seen some lessons learned from the Florida Digital Services that could lead to even more improvements in the future? Like basically, not necessarily just in Florida, but basically for any organization, from how they stood it up and how they're managing it?
Yeah, I think the idea of having a reference implementation in place and guidance to be able to say, yes, maybe this particular vendor's product is what we would recommend your organization to use to protect against this. And here's how we would recommend having it stood up. Here are configuration options. Here's a playbook that you can follow to try to move in that direction. I think having that sort of a central resource, I mean, let's face it, for many of the people in the room, you're dealing with city government, you're dealing with county government, even if you're dealing with a state government agency, the expertise in everything is just not always there. You may have some product that's being brought in. Maybe FLDS was a part of recommending that product, but nobody within your organization is familiar with that product or knows exactly how to configure that product. So the ability to, once again, serve that consultative role and recommend what product to be using, how to configure it, what this is going to protect you against, what this is not going to protect you against, that sort of thing. I think that sort of consultation arrangement is where I see it. And I'm going to defer to Michelle because, when I was sitting over there in the ivory tower of academia for all these years, Michelle's been sitting there living it. So I'd love to hear Michelle's thoughts as well in terms of what have you seen in terms of how that has benefited and is going to continue.
And Michelle, I'll tag on to that because if you think about it for a second, you're at the county level, but if you even go lower at the regional, local government levels, so like a lot of times they can't afford to have the expertise in-house in order to implement these basic benefits that are provided by the state. And so in a lot of cases, if they don't have that expertise, it's not used. It just goes to waste or whatever. So is this helping in that manner?
I believe so, because you're right. Many of the smaller counties just don't have the staff, the numbers of people to be able to do things. And they have, one guy that's got to be the jack of all trades, he's the purchasing director, literally. I mean, I'm talking about Mariana and Chad over Mariana. He's the purchasing director and he's the IT person. And so they have to wear many hats, and it's hard. I mean, this stuff changes too fast. And, when things happen, you really need experts in those different areas. And, FLDS, they are available to help with that, much like a MSI SAC or CISA you mentioned earlier, things like that. And I will say too, that FLDS has been very receptive to the special needs of cities and counties.
You're right.
When they had basically a list of things we could choose from, different types of solutions. And we needed one of the solutions, but the one that they offered wasn't the government cloud version. And so we were real quick to tell them, we kind of need the government cloud version. This is great, but we really need the government cloud instead of the commercial cloud version. And they made it happen. I mean, it just that quick.
Well, you may have picked up on something they didn't even realize, and it's great that they're able to turn around that quick, be that reactive. That's great.
Mhm.
Greg, you're about to.
Yeah, let me just point out something, again, echoing what Michelle just said. She mentioned the fact that there were at least, I heard from FLDS, 66 of the 67 counties for that cybersecurity grant funding. Now, I actually asked the question because I'm a curious kind of a guy. And I said, which county was it that didn't apply? They did tell me. I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to make that public. But, the basic point is, think about that for just a second. One of Florida's 67 counties didn't necessarily even either have the resources or have the time to be able to even apply for that 30 million in year one and 40 million in year two type of resource to try and improve their cybersecurity. So I just think it speaks to, I hate to say a lack of depth, but I mean, we don't have just cybersecurity experience neck deep all over the state in county and city government. We have little, ankle deep experience, and we need to rely on people who can tell us this is the best solution or these are the best solutions. Pick which one you want. Tell them, oh, I need the gov cloud, not the commercial cloud approach, that sort of thing. But to be able to say, here's where your weakness is, and here's what we recommend to try to strengthen our county government, city government, state agencies. And
this is a really good point that they're bringing up here. You think about this for a second. Let's say you've got three bosses. I mean, you're the IT head, your human resources, and your logistics. Okay, they're in there. You're going to go after the thing that's biting you the hardest at the time that it's biting you. And if it's not IT, if it's running okay on the side, you're not going to pay attention to that. And it's really, one of the things that we've tried to do in these presentations is to try to share with everybody where the resources are that you don't know about, and because you don't know what you know. And that's how Florida really did a good job with Florida Digital Services in providing support for getting these grants and moving it forward.
The remote work paradigm for our work environments. And all of us lived through the challenges of and many of us didn't have very much of that. And so had to figure it out on the fly.
Immediately.
Exactly. And so our team got together and it was like, okay, what are we going to do? Nobody has laptops. We only have a few of those. How are we gonna make this happen? And so the very first thing we decided is, whatever we decide, we will not compromise security. That's just a hard no. We will not do that. And that was kind of our overarching umbrella for the whole thing. And so we based every decision on that. Mm-hmm. And so through doing that, we did find the county-owned devices that we did have, and we just so happened, and I think this was you're a brand new CIO, God's looking after me at the time. We were getting ready to order a whole bunch of laptops, about 80 of them at the time, for our public libraries to check out to the public. And so we had that ready. We hadn't pulled the trigger on the order. I said, get that order out the door today. And we just absconded that order. And so that at least gave us 80 more. So that gave us something to work with. And had we not done that, what we were able to get the things in 2 weeks. Just a few days later, people were looking at 6 and 8 weeks before they were able to get stuff.
Right.
So we just got in under that,
You beat
under the
supply
wire.
chain crash.
And so we took the laptops that we did have that are managed by us. We handed those out to people. And then, of course, that has our antivirus and all those good things on it. Lots of people had computers at home. And so, okay, now how we're going to do that, because we don't want those connecting directly to our network, not knowing what operating system, what patch level they're at, what antivirus, if any, are on those things, or maybe they're already infected. So what we did with that is we created virtual workstations and allowed them to connect to the virtual workstation, and then only the virtual workstation would connect to us. So we kind of air gap those things from us, and we found that to be a big help. Another obstacle we figured out is we didn't have the right kind of licensing that would allow you to change your password unless you were physically on the network.
Right.
So if your password expired and you're at home, you're trying to connect in, that became difficult. So Microsoft worked with us and got us the licenses that we needed to make that happen. Speaking of that, VPN licenses, and let me say this. Our vendors are more than just vendors to us. Our vendors are partners with us. And if any other time, it wasn't shown like it was during COVID, because they stepped up. And I mean, I was getting calls and said, what do you need? What can we do to help you? What's going on? And so VPN licenses, we always had plenty, our licenses are here and our high watermark was about here, but then suddenly it was here. And so Cisco at the time was our VPN provider, and they just said, here are the licenses. How many do you need was basically the question. And so that was a big help. On our phone system, you had to figure out, okay, you got people working at home, but now how do I get a hold of them? Nobody knows everybody's numbers. There's no directory of everybody's cell numbers and home numbers. There's pockets of these things, but nothing that's comprehensive. And so we got it turned on so that we have kind of a call forwarding on steroids, and in Avaya world, it's called EC500. And it's more than a call forwarding, but you could just 4-digit dial, they get the calls and those kinds of things. And that helped us out tremendously. We discovered some of the challenges. Many of our people live in remote areas or in areas that don't have as much bandwidth as others. And that became a challenge. So with us, we figured out that the FirstNet, suddenly we had more powerful reach than we did before. So we were able to offer some MiFi devices to those people and get connectivity where we had not ever had it before.
That's interesting.
And so those were big things. We also discovered we had users who were like engineers and our GIS folks that handle these huge engineering and mapping files. Even with a souped up thing at home, and maybe they've got good bandwidth, but trying to do all that and have it work over the network, we found out quickly that it made better sense to have the juicy machine sitting in the office, and then we just remote connect to that through one of those VPN workstation or virtual workstations, so that all the hard work's going on over here and all that stuff's not trying to traverse the network. We're just sharing screen changes. And we found that to be a better solution for those kinds of users. So, because everything's just not one size fits all. And so, yeah, there was a whole lot of things that we learned about that, and challenges and obstacles.
Really amazing. And the big thing is I imagine a lot of the things that you learned or that you did, I mean, you had to implement this in all counties, that everybody had to implement this like immediately and on the fly going forward. How long did it to do that, basically stand up? But basically
we had our first work at home people in 3 days. Yeah, and we brought in more, as time went on, but our first ones, we're out the door with some of those laptops that we already had and whatnot. And then all the rest of that stuff evolved, as time went on.
Greg, I imagine you probably got some experience back in working with high-end or very heavy intensive computing needs from a distance, from the edge of the network versus internal to the firewall. So what are your experiences with that? What do you think?
Well, I think I want to make sure that we turn a corner here. It's not going to be a sharp left, but I want us to think about the citizen experience now. Let's make sure we're talking about constituent services as well, because if I'm thinking in terms of the way we've talked about this, yeah, we were able to get workforce within all the state government agencies moved over to remote work because you had to do that. We couldn't have people in a call center or a main office for a county government or something like that. I was actually moving back to the state of Florida just as COVID exploded. So I'm going to a place on the north end of Hillsborough County where Tampa is, and I'm trying to, get plates for a Florida resident. I had lived in Florida before and I was coming back to Florida. And I'm saying to myself, how are we going to do this? Because the line for this government office in Hillsborough County is now basically stretching to Pinellas County. Well, okay, it was a slight exaggeration, but I think we need to make sure we think about, okay, how do we now that we can handle the beach work? And by the way, Michelle, I'm going to have to talk to Okta about whether I can take my 3 screens out on the beach here in Florida. Michael was talking about this work that takes place on the beach. I haven't experienced that yet. I want to experience that sometime soon. But the ability to have citizens interacting with government in secure ways. Michelle said security was never going to be compromised. And that's always the right answer. No matter what the user's experience is, whether it's an employee or whether it's a citizen, security cannot be compromised. Reference my comments earlier about Fulton County, Georgia. But citizens need to be able to get access to systems as well. So think about everything that you do, not as an employee of local government, county government, or state government, but think of what you do as a citizen. Now, I've heard we're going to do some polls. This is not a poll. I got 2 questions I want to ask, though. All I'm looking for is a show of hands. We live in Florida. There are toll roads in Florida, okay? Show of hands, just all I'm asking for. Do you have a SunPass account? Most of the folks in the room, a little over 50%, have a SunPass account. Okay, so for those of you who said you do have a SunPass account, do you have the SunPass app on your phone? Okay, about half of the ones who said they had a SunPass, okay, well, I don't know if you knew this or not, but there's a SunPass app. I've got it on my phone. I found out that my balance was below $10 and I need to be refilling. But now think about that. Think about, this is an agency within state government that has an app. I can go on there, I can check my balance. I can look at my most recent activity. I can actually purchase a brand new transponder and have it sent to my address on file if I wish to. Once I get that transponder, I can actually activate it. It's using biometrics so that it's a facial recognition on my phone before it's going to allow anybody to access the SunPass app on my device. So that's where we are today. I have an 86-year-old mother who is still living and is in good health. She does not have a laptop. She has never owned a laptop in her life. She does have a smartphone. Doesn't know how to use it for anything but to place a phone call, but she does have a smartphone. How could my mother access government services if her son or her daughter or a friend from the neighborhood or wherever can help her figure out, okay, well, I'm gonna take you to the site for this particular government agency, and it's gonna make you recognize your facial pattern here, and you'll be able to, all right, we actually can solve something we talk about a great deal in terms of equitable access. How many folks have a smartphone now?
Everybody.
Almost everybody, okay? Almost everybody has a smartphone now. You don't need an Apple Mac sitting on your desk at home or a Windows device, a laptop, something like that. And so everything we're doing, whether we're at the beach or not, everything we're doing, I want to be able to do from here. SunPass. And if there's anybody here from the toll authority, Turnpike Authority, I'm calling you out to say, think about what's there. Your citizens want to access your services in that way. Are you there today? Can your citizens, including me, access your services from here? Whether that's with an app or whether it's with a website they can visit and they can still authenticate into just a regular application that they access via their browser or something like that. If I were in Atlanta, as I was about 6 months ago to make a presentation roughly similar to this, I said, hey, you folks in Georgia state government, your competition is the Delta app. I want to be able to log in. I want to be able to check in for my flight. I want to be able to change my flight. Delta, SunPass, that's where citizens are expecting services to go today. I'm not asking show of hands. I'm just asking you to say to yourself, are we there yet? And what do we need to do to get to that point where we can do services from the edge, whether that's as government employees or whether that's just as citizens wanting to access Leon County services, Hillsborough County services, City of Tallahassee services. I've seen some City of Tallahassee folks in here. Do you have that experience, people, today? That's the experience they're looking for, doing business on the edge.
Well, I'm going to stay with you then, because this leads right into the next thing I want to ask you about.
Hang on before you do
Oh,
that. I
go
do
right
you one
ahead.
better on the SunPass.
All right.
So mine's set up that it just always puts more money in there when mine never goes below the $10 thing.
Okay. We have just documented something here that Michelle is more technologically advanced than I am. Actually, I will say I did not set that up. And it's one of those things where I got to be careful. The FBI is in the room. I know they're coming up on the third, but I'm a citizen. I'm not an employee of state government or any state government agency anymore, right? Do I trust the state of Florida's Turnpike Authority with my credit card number? Different people will answer that in different ways, all right? I'll be perfectly happy to key in that 16-digit card number and that 4-digit expiration date and that 3-digit code on the back every single time I got to add. But yes, we can do that. But again, it's a rhetorical question, but I'm asking you, is your state agency or county government or city government, are you at that level right now?
The one thing I would say is that they're a hell of a lot more forward, closer to that level than they were, say, 3 years ago.
3 to 5 years ago,
Yes.
we've all gone a long
Non-existent.
way. And I've had that SunPass account for probably at least 15 years now. So, it's there, but
I've had mine with the automatic renewal for at least 5 years, so I don't know what you're waiting on.
I love my government, but I don't necessarily trust my government in terms of keeping my credit card number safe. I'm sitting here thinking about Fulton County, Georgia, and I'm sorry, that's just in the news right now is why I keep bringing it up. But it's like, who knows? Whatever your political persuasion is, whether you're really interested in what the district attorney up there has been doing, or whether you're really interested in the legal documents for the Trump case itself, whatever your perspective on this is, you may learn more about it Thursday morning at 8:39 a.m. because that data was not secured. And so the news story that I read out of Atlanta this morning said, well, we're taking steps to address the potential leaking of personal information. And I thought, oh, if I were a resident of Fulton County, Georgia, I would feel so much better now knowing that county government was taking steps to address the leaking of my personal information.
Well, some things don't change, i.e. the federal leak so many years ago.
The FBI is in the room, Michael. Don't talk about federal government data.
So, well, as long as we're there, Greg, complexity of integrated solutions at the edge is what we're talking about. They're problematic, to say the least, as you're talking about. So how important then is the interoperability across different solutions to ensuring mission success and smooth customer experiences across different levels of state government and services? This like goes right into what you're.
I am not trying to call out the state of New Jersey here, but this was in the news when COVID first hit. Michelle was talking about how we could thank COVID for certain things. I was still a professor back in those days. And so I could actually use the state of New Jersey as a really good example. The state of New Jersey's unemployment compensation system was written in COBOL.
Admiral Grace Hopper would love you.
It was written in COBOL. Now, I will tell you, I'm old enough that I know COBOL. I've written COBOL. And I found out what those people in New Jersey were paying for folks who could still program in COBOL. And I said, why am I a professor? Okay. But the basic idea is you've got these old legacy systems, like something in the state of New Jersey, unemployment compensation that's written in COBOL. How are you going to access that kind of system? Well, what you need, and I'm not going to name any names of any companies or anything like that, but what you need is you need a system that can provide access, not just to these modern applications, like say your Office 365 email that you use at work, or your Google Workspace email that you use at work, or whatever you actually tend to use, but can also provide access to those kinds of legacy applications. If you work in the unemployment department in the state of New Jersey, then you've got to interact with a COBOL-based system. And how do you authenticate into that? How are you authorized to do certain things, not authorized to do other things? You've got to be able to support all the use cases. You can't just say, okay, if you've got a nice modern SaaS platform, then we can help you out. But if you're sitting there with one of these old legacy systems that maybe you stood up on your own 20 years ago or 25 years ago, well, I'm sorry, we can't help you with that. No, citizens need to be able to interact with government, even if it is a legacy system. So do we go with a mobile first approach? I could name you the name of a very large state. It's not a publicly referenceable customer for me to give you the name of the state, but a very large state where their Department of Health and Human Services has recently stood up a mobile app so that anything you as a citizen of that state need to be able to access within Health and Human Services, and that includes a lot. So think about, all the things that would be included within a Department of Health and Human Services. Any services that are needed, you can get on your phone and you can go to the Health and Human Services app and you can interact with any of those different benefit programs for which you might be eligible. So it's kind of like SunPass for Health and Human Services, SunPass for Department of Transportation, SunPass for the Department of Corrections, SunPass portal, applications, access to everything, legacy, modern cloud. You need to be able to support all the use cases. And that's where citizen services have to go for them to not have to stand in that line that goes from Hillsborough County to Pinellas.
So are we talking about building bridges to interact with those programs? Or are we talking about building interoperability in from the ground up? Or are we talking about both?
But we can do both, right? And the basic idea is, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands on this one, but I bet most of the people in this room probably can think of an application that you have within your government agency, whatever level of government you are, that you would say, yeah, I don't really know that I see us spending the money to stand that up as a cloud app now. We're just happy with where it is, right? We don't have the money laying around to modernize this. So how do maybe it's using some old protocol, like, forgive me for the technical term here, header-based auth or something like that. And we need to be able to provide access to people into that application that uses header-based authentication, not necessarily a modern protocol. We need to be able to do that. And so how do we actually provide that service? Sometimes it's building an interoperability bridge. Sometimes it's maybe updating that system. I think the state of New Jersey did finally decide it was time to move off of COBOL, by the way, and they actually did update that system to a more modern language, if you will. But you got to be able to do both, because nobody's got unlimited piles of money laying around to bring everything up to modern standards and think everything is just sunshine and rainbows and we can do everything with
Well,
modern
not only that,
technology.
just supporting it and getting the capability to support it and to update it and bring it up to code and to keep patches in there
Yes.
is something that you can't do anymore. So you have to do that.
Yes.
So, Michelle, so what impact has the stand up of the Florida Digital Services had on data security for Leon County?
Well, you know, one of the things they did when they first offered, one of the goals from offering the grant was that they wanted this to be so that they'll provide the licenses, but they just wanted the data from those things so that now we would be basically the first state to have that across the whole state view of security and what's going on. And so that they would have that insight to that. And I think that's huge. Now, I don't work there, so I can't give you any insight into how good that's working on their side. I have no idea. But you know, they just needed just the basic data, not, you know, like,
Right.
where did Michelle Taylor go on, you know, such and such a date? What website was she visiting? Well, it's not like that, you know, it's more the holistic information. And I think that's huge. I hope that's working out for
Well,
them like
that's
they intended.
incredible. Think about it for a second. And Craig, you can bound in on this, but if you've got that holistic view across the state, I think that's exactly what we're looking at with this umbrella case that you're talking about, that Florida Digital Services providing, is this umbrella security. It can look at, I think it's more that then can point to areas that may need closer attention and closer scrutiny and maybe prevent problems before they happen. Am I right?
That would be the idea. And the truth of the matter is, I got a lot of nods out of this crowd when I said, Michael, maybe we should ask people who doesn't have multiple jobs and multiple responsibilities that we're trying to look at, right? So for all of you who are sitting out here who have all those multiple jobs and multiple responsibilities, I'm sure you just also have all kinds of free time to be sitting out there learning about what are these cyber attacks that are kind of occurring on the edge, new approaches, new attack vectors that people are coming at our systems with, right? You got all kinds of time to learn about that kind of stuff. No, the truth of the matter is, very few of us have the kind of time to go out there and sort of continue that ability to develop that knowledge and say, oh yeah, I know exactly what's happening and what could happen to us next. And therefore I know exactly what steps we need to take internally to protect our systems and our access against those types of attacks. It's just not the world we live in today.
It's good to have all the help that you can get. So this next one's going to go right up your alley. So risk to data access, integrity, and storage areas diverse as cyber attacks, ransomware attacks, even natural disasters. So what role does risk management play in helping achieve the goals of secure yet accessible government services? And what elements, I mean, specifically tools and practices, can protect the systems from ransomware attacks?
Michael, if I were in the old university environment where I used to teach, I'd be throwing a PowerPoint. We're going to take two things and we're going to multiply them times one another. We're going to say, what do we think is the potential financial impact or the negative impact if this cyber attack succeeded against us? And then what do we think is the probability that we're going to encounter that particular cyber attack? We're going to multiply those two things by one another, and we're going to just sort of rank order everything that's there and say, all right, so what are the potential attacks that would have the highest probability of giving us the highest negative impact? And we're going to start with those. And maybe ransomware would be right at the top of something like that. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to say, okay, what are the technologies that are out there that can actually be looking at all of that traffic that's coming in, maybe across my firewall, or maybe you use something that sort of replaces a firewall today and just inspects all of the traffic that comes in and goes out and makes sure that only packets that should get through and stuff that shouldn't get through doesn't get through. And you basically say, I'm looking at everything and I'm trying to make sure that I'm protecting against those worst case scenarios. If my street address leaked from SunPass. If my street address leaked from the Turnpike Authority's systems, how bad would that be? I'll give you a clue. You heard me say I live in Tampa. You do a search on Craig Knight, Tampa. Guess what's going to happen? You're going to find my street address. So what's the impact of that? We don't want that to happen, of course, but the impact of that is not that huge. What is the impact if Michelle's credit card with a $3.2 million credit limit on it
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, Leon County's
leaks?
good.
That's a much bigger concern, right? And, you know, the truth of the matter is there are lots of organizations out there that say, I look at that and I say to myself, I don't really want to face that prospect. So I could name you private sector organizations, and I can name you governmental organizations, both at the federal level and at the state level and below, that basically say, I don't want to own that data. Major League Baseball. I don't know if got any baseball fans in the room. MLB.com. MLB.com. You go on Major League Baseball's website. You're not logging in with credentials that Major League Baseball stores. They don't want that liability.
Mhm.
They're using a company to manage that for them. I'll let you Google that and see who they use. FedEx, they don't want that data. T-Mobile, they don't want that data. They're outsourcing the ability to store that information and use that access, that information to authenticate access, that sort of thing. Then you don't have to worry about it. You don't own the data. You're not responsible for the data, and it can actually sort of make sure that you can just say, oh, that's not my problem. Michelle, anytime you have the ability to hand it over to some other group and say, that's their problem now, I don't have to deal with it. How long will it take me to get you to sign on the dotted line for it to be somebody else's problem?
I don't know if it completely gets us off the hook, but we do that. We don't, for our apps that use that, like in our libraries, you can go in and you can pay to print, you can swipe your card and all those kinds of things. But that swipe information doesn't get saved in any of our information. That's purely through a banking relationship that we have. And we do try to standardize on that. The problem with that is now your eggs are in one basket. So I don't know. It's kind of
Depends on the
damn
basket.
nut.
Depends on the basket. If it's a good basket, it doesn't have to create a problem.
I love it. I love it. So you bring up another point though. So Michelle, how important is it for the state, local and educational sector to continue promoting a culture of collaboration and information sharing, okay, versus the culture of restricting access for protections? And really, how do you strike that right balance? I mean, we've been talking, if we listen to Craig, it's nope. And even you earlier said, I'm not, jeopardizing security for any reason.
Right.
How do you strike that right balance between the two? Because you have to have the access and the capability also.
Well, it's magic. That's the real answer.
There you go.
But, in Leon County, collaboration, when you don't have a lot of money, you have to get real creative on how you do things. And so collaboration is a huge thing with us. We've been for decades, we do things with the city of Tallahassee. We do things with FSU. We do things with our other, what we call constitutional offices. That's like the tax collector and property appraiser, supervisor of elections, medical examiner, those kinds of people. And so we do that now, and they're responsible for their data, like, for example, the sheriff's office and the information that's in the jail system and monitoring that. They're responsible for that. But then the courts need it, and then the state attorney and public defender need it, and probation needs it. And so there's a whole lot of collaboration on that front. We've been doing those things for years. We built early in, I don't know, Naomi's here. I don't remember the year, but we built the public safety complex. We just had the 10-year anniversary. We just had the 10-year anniversary. And that was a collaborative effort between Leon County and the city of Tallahassee. And with the consolidated dispatch, they're one single entity that manages all the 911 calls for the fire department, the EMS, for Tallahassee Police, and for the sheriff's office. And, you know, that was a collaborative effort that, in spite of the world telling us it couldn't be done, we're doing that and doing it very successfully. But again, in a real-time crime center, that was something that was our sheriff's brainchild. And that was a collaborative effort between LCSO, TPD, and FSU PD. And what those people are there to do is to enhance the people over at the Consolidated Dispatch, and they're the law enforcement investigative side real time. So when those calls are coming in, they're checking out and providing as much information as they can about that to them to keep our first responders as safe as possible. That's a personal note with me. My son's a firefighter, so you know, we're all for that kind of stuff. And in the IT space for Leon County, because we don't have all these silos of IT support, we consolidate where we can. Leon County IT supports the networking and the telephones and the Microsoft licensing, those kinds of enterprise things for all of our entities, including the constitutional offices. And because we do that, we can have things that none of us individually would be able to have, like redundant internet capabilities. And we have a world-class GIS program that is half city, half county. And we just wouldn't have that degree. It grows exponentially because of the collaboration effort. And but you know, so you do have to talk about the security side of it, and the walls, tear down those things where you can, and agree we're going to do it this way. And a lot of that's built on a huge amount of trust, and we do have to trust each other to do that. So
Great.
Michael, let me jump in right there. And I appreciate what Michelle said about how things grow exponentially. Now, you can go to my company's website, Okta's website, and you can find information about, for example, the state of Illinois, which is a big Okta customer. But there's another Midwestern state that I don't know that I'm allowed to tell you which Midwestern state it is. They're actually pursuing right now what they refer to as a whole of state approach. And what I mean by that is they're not just talking about, say, the state government agencies, and they're not talking just about good collaborative efforts between, say, county level and city level. They're basically saying, we want to actually try to support citizen identity across all three layers. I've got one account. I can access all state government services, all of my county services, and all of the city or town, whatever the municipality is, every bit of that using one set of credentials. And you say, that sounds like an interesting idea, but how would we make that work? Well, interoperability, building of bridges, being able to interact with any system anywhere, you know, just sort of think about that and say, would I like it if I could, say, interact with everything in state government that I need to, and interact with everything in my county government that I need to, and if I live in a city or township, interact with everything within that city or township government, all with a single set of credentials. And I'm not necessarily talking username and password. Hopefully we're all learning, if we haven't already learned, password is one of the least secure authentication mechanisms that can exist out there, but my biometric never has to be reset. My fingerprint doesn't change, my facial recognition doesn't change. So think about not just those collaborations where you're told they can't be done. Well, Michelle, you've proved that they can be done. And how do we then say, let's just do that everywhere and make it easy for people? And that's where citizens are putting their expectations today.
I know we're building with that because the federal government did that back when we were there with the single sign-on capability between RISNet, MILNet, NSANet, the unclassified versions of them for law enforcement to be able to share information across state, local boundaries, regions, case deconfliction systems and things like that. And that was really important for officer safety. Now, Michelle, you had mentioned also FirstNet and how you utilize that for FirstNet was what was built in order to service the first bring in collaboration and unified networks across them. You use that in the state or county government now and state government to be able to collaborate and bring.
We depend on it. I mean, it's been a game changer for us, mainly because the reach is so much better. We, like I said earlier, we had those areas where people barely could get cell service. We had one guy that worked for us and he says, hang on, I got to go stand by the refrigerator and hold my arm up. This is the only place he could get a connection, otherwise he's breaking up. You can't understand what he's saying. FirstNet, and it was great. So
Michael, let me ask you a question. I'm turning this thing around for once here.
Yeah.
When you were talking about doing all of those different systems within the federal space, when you were in the federal space, did
Right.
anybody ever say to you, no, that's not realistic, or you can't do that?
Oh, absolutely. We said to hell with you. Yeah, and that's really the way you have to do it. You have to just say, the heck with it. Don't tell me what I can't do. Tell me how I can do what needs to be done. And the big thing, the really major issue that there is, and I'm sure all of you have faced this before, the major issue is across the different agencies and across the boundaries. And somebody's worrying that their rice bowl may be taken. And the whole idea here is how do we help each other and make it beneficial across all aspects. And this is a case of state, regional, and federal agencies working together to come to a solution that is beneficial for everybody.
If I never get asked back to this event, it's because I asked the moderator a question. And by the way, I wanted to say for those of you who are getting an hour of continuing education credit for being here during this hour, be aware that you're getting that credit because of Michelle, and it's what she's saying that's giving you that hour's worth of credit. Okay, not me. Just wanted you to know that.
Well, we got time. I'm going to do this last question, and both of you will come with this. Michelle, I'm going to jump to your question. In today's world, it's increasingly important to defend our sites from client-side threats. So if a malicious entity were to establish a zombie device by infiltrating an employee system, what are some methods for protecting or recovering applications and data inside the perimeter? In other words, what I'm talking about is it lives there. It's on your network already. I mean, it's probably there, and something happens and it wakes up, and now it's attacking from inside your perimeter.
right.
What do you do?
Well, first of all, I always tell people, you don't have to outrun the bear. You just have to outrun everybody else or somebody else, not everybody else, just somebody else. But the biggest thing, is being prepared ahead of time, layers of security. Everything's about layers. There's no really way to secure our stuff. I mean, the only secure way would be to unplug it. And then it wouldn't be of any use. So, it's like having a car with no tires at that point. So, obviously your backups, it's just most of it's common sense things like backups, making sure that the data is secure, not in a place that anybody on the network can get to it, have it air gapped from your regular network, and making sure your networks are segmented so that, and not everybody has access to every single segment. So at least if that happens, it can sort of be contained. And one of the things that we found that helped with that just about as much as anything was having app control installed on the PCs. We had this when we first rolled out app control. We had it in most of the departments, but there was still one or two that didn't have it. And literally that morning at 11 o'clock, I called and said, did you guys ever turn on that app control? No. And I said, I think you should do that because we're having an outbreak over here in this place. And by 2 o'clock, boom, they already had it because it didn't get it installed quick enough. If it installed it right then, probably would have been fine. But anyway, and so that's a huge control, because then if something gets on there and it's trying to then infect the neighbor next to it, app control just goes, I don't know what you are. I'm not installing it. So that I just can't say enough about app control and how big a thing that was. Monitoring service, having those in place. We're not staffed 24/7. I don't have a big enough staff to have 24/7. And those monitoring services are very valuable because they are staffed 24/7. And they will call me in the middle of the night if something strange happens. And then following up on that is when you get those calls, follow up on it, check it out and see. Maybe 99% of the time it's absolutely nothing. That's a good thing, but you never know. It might be that 1%. So it is important to follow up on those things and do it promptly. We have things like malicious domain blocking installed. Is that 100%? No, none of this stuff is 100%, but it's just layers and layers and layers of things that hopefully you've filtered it out somewhere along the lines. And then I can't say enough about having those established relationships with the FLDS, with the FBI, with FDLE here in Florida, MSI SAC, CISA, all those places are invaluable of what they bring to you. And you may not need them all the time, but when you build those relationships ahead of time and you have those contacts that then when something does happen, you can pick up the phone and call somebody and go, is this something? We've looked at it. We can't really figure it out if it's something or not. And they can look at it and they go, you're right, you're good, that's nothing. Or they go, you need to do something. Now hair's on fire, but those relationships are just critical in this. And then of course, everybody knows to have incident response plans, those kinds of things. And make sure those plans take care of the simple things like food. What if your people are going to have to be here for an extended period of time? Treat, like a hurricane, you have to think in those terms. And we all know how to deal with hurricanes. We are good at it. We know what to do. And so think in those terms, because you might have staff, some that are having to spend hours and days there. Think about the shifts and how you would give them relief for that. But food and a place to go take a nap if they need to are critical as well. And then the biggest thing is don't panic. When it happens, don't panic. Keep your wits about you and gather the team of folks that you already know and try to get through things.
Those are all good points, good advice. And it's really, what's interesting here is you bring up the relationships. It's not just it's knowing that you need those relationships and the willingness to go out and create them and keep them, which kudos to you for doing that. That's fantastic. Greg, any last thoughts from you?
Yeah, I guess I got two last thoughts. Number one, I'm gonna just caution on Michelle's analogy there about running the bear. Yes, I understand the whole analogy of I don't have to outrun the bear, I just have to outrun you. The problem is sometimes there are two bears. So you got to be able to outrun the bears ultimately. And so Michelle's talking about all the different layers that are out there. And I'm going to put a plug in. My only plug I'm going to put in here for something that my company is doing right now, which is that we're in the middle of releasing early this year something called identity threat protection. Now, here's the idea. We're going to actually make sure that Michelle's phone rings less in the 2 o'clock hour of the morning, because yeah, she's got that monitoring service. And that monitoring service can say, Michelle, something's going on within your tenants, within your organization. You need to take a real hard, serious look at this. What Okta is moving toward is what we're referring to as continuous re-authentication. The basic idea is somebody gets access to your systems. Maybe it's you. Maybe you have legitimate access to your system. But all of a sudden, let's say somehow there's a token that gets compromised or something like that, and now somebody else is trying to log in using your session token or something like that. But all of a sudden we're realizing, wait a minute, this session token was used from that IP address. Now it's being used from a different IP address. What do we want to do when that happens? Oh, let's call Michelle at 2 o'clock in the morning. No. What if you could achieve a single log out? Log that user, whether it's Michelle or someone impersonating Michelle, out of everything they're in, and then require re-authentication. Michelle's going to be able to re-authenticate. Excuse me, Michelle's asleep at 2 a.m. I hope you're asleep at 2 a.m.
Not
Michelle,
usually. But...
I know IT people do that sometimes, but so there's some time of the day when you're asleep and you don't want to be disturbed. Use those kinds of proactive security controls, a layer that will actually be sitting there watching and saying, when we see something suspicious like this happening, somebody logged in with Michelle's credential from an IP address that's, say, in Russia. I didn't know Michelle was going to Russia. Did you? No, she wasn't going to Russia. So All of a sudden, we log Michelle out of everything and say, you totally have to re-authenticate. And can Michelle do that? Yes, probably with her biometric, her passkey on her phone or whatever, she can do that. Can that malicious actor in Russia who actually just got a session token somehow and used it to impersonate, can that person in Russia, that state actor perhaps, satisfy that biometric challenge? No, they can't. And so it's that kind of proactive security that lets you outrun every single bear.
Thanks for listening, and thank you to our guests, Dr. Craig Knight and Michelle Taylor. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Caracast, and be sure to listen to our other discussions. If you'd like more information on how Carasoft can assist your organization, please visit www.carasoft.com or email us at slgmarketing@carasoft.com. Thanks again for listening, and have a great day.